I still remember the moment I got that call from the lawyer. I was sitting in my kitchen, holding a cup of coffee that I had just poured. At first, I thought it was just another routine call about some paperwork, something I rarely pay attention to. But no, it was a call that would change everything. Briana was gone. The woman who had once been my wife, the one who had filled my life with both love and tension for so many years, was suddenly gone. She had passed away, and the news hit me like a punch to the gut. It felt surreal. How could she be gone? After all the years apart, after everything we had been through, there she was, just gone. I couldn't even process it at first. I had been worrying about trivial things, like a faulty sprinkler system, while she had been slipping away. 3 days had passed since her death, and it felt like I had been living in some sort of suspended animation. The lawyer, Janet Morrison, went on to inform me about the funeral and the will reading. Briana had named me as a beneficiary. A beneficiary? Me? The word felt so foreign, so impossible. Briana had built an empire after our divorce, turning her small consulting business into something unrecognizable from what it was when we were together. What on earth could she possibly have left for me? I didn't know what to expect. I didn't even know if I should go to the funeral, but something inside told me I had to. Maybe it was to honor the woman I once loved, or maybe it was just a chance to make sense of things that didn't make sense anymore. Either way, I found myself preparing to attend, despite all the unanswered questions swirling in my mind. The name Briana Elizabeth Flores echoed in my mind, the sound of it almost like a ghost calling from the past. Every time I thought of her, it was like being swept away by a wave of memories, many of them blurred by time, but still so vivid. There were flashes, her fierce determination, the way she would enter a room and immediately command attention without saying a word. The air would change around her, and all eyes would be drawn to her, whether she liked it or not. She had this presence about her, something I had always admired, but at the same time, it was something I could never quite keep up with. I couldn't help but think back to the first time we met. It wasn't love at first sight, but it was certainly unforgettable. I was just a guy, sitting in Murphy's diner, eating my pie, minding my own business. The place was quiet, save for the hum of the jukebox and the clinking of silverware. I was halfway through my apple pie when I noticed her across the room. She was standing at the counter, arguing with the manager. The topic? His ridiculous policy of not hiring women for the weekend manager position. The conversation had become heated, and I found myself watching, unable to look away. Her voice was firm, unyielding, and she didn't hesitate to call him out, pointing out how outdated and unfair his views were. The more I listened, the more I realized how determined she was, how unapologetically she stood her ground. There was something magnetic about her, a fire that seemed to burn even brighter when she was standing up for what she believed in. She wasn't shouting, but her words cut through the air like a knife. I could see the manager shrinking under her words, stumbling for a response, clearly outmatched by her intelligence and resolve. She was a force of nature. I was just some guy, sitting in the corner, invisible to her. I wasn't part of the conversation, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. There was something in the way she held herself, something raw and real that made me feel like I was witnessing something important, something I wanted to be a part of. I had no idea who she was, but I felt like I had to know her. And then, as quickly as the confrontation started, it was over. She grabbed her purse, turned on her heel, and headed toward the door. As she passed me, I caught a glimpse of her face, sharp cheekbones, a determined jawline, and eyes that seemed to see right through me. I couldn't breathe. She walked out with the same intensity she had brought to the argument, and the diner felt smaller without her presence. But then, as if fate was giving me a chance, I saw it. Her business card, sitting alone on the counter, abandoned after the heated exchange. My heart skipped a beat. Without thinking, I reached out, picked it up, and memorized the phone number before my brain could talk me out of it. I had no real plan, no idea what I was going to do with it. But in that moment, I knew I couldn't let it go. 3 days later, I finally gathered the courage to call. I didn't even know what I would say, whether I would sound like a fool, or if I would manage to get through the conversation without embarrassing myself, but I did it. I dialed her number, holding my breath, feeling the weight of every moment that had led up to this. She answered on the second ring. "Briana Chen," she said briskly. There was no hesitation in her voice, no sign that she was expecting a call from a stranger, but I could sense the energy she radiated, even through the phone. "Hi, this is Jerry Flores. We haven't met, but I saw you at Murphy's Diner the other night," I blurted out. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and for a split second, I thought she was going to hang up on me. But then, she surprised me. "The man with the apple pie," she said, a small chuckle in her voice. "You left a good tip, too." I smiled, relieved she wasn't hanging up, but feeling like an idiot at the same time. "Yeah, that's me. I was wondering if you want to grab a coffee sometime?" There was another pause, longer this time, and I could almost hear the wheels turning in her head. "Are you asking me on a date, or do you need business consulting?" she asked, her tone teasing but not unkind. I chuckled nervously. "Definitely a date, but if you want to give me some business advice, I'm all ears." There was a laugh on the other end. A real laugh, not the polite laugh that most people give when they're trying to spare your feelings. "Saturday night, Romano's on 3rd Street, 7, she said. "And you better bring your best game, Jerry. I don't settle for anything less than the best." That was the beginning. It wasn't fireworks or love at first sight. It was just two people who hadn't yet realized how much they needed each other. But from that first phone call, I knew that my life was about to change. I had no idea just how much, but I was about to find out. I've always thought that Dustin, our son, was a perfect blend of Briana and me, each of us living on through him in ways both obvious and subtle. He had her sharp mind, her ambition, and her drive to succeed. But at the same time, there was a part of him that carried something of me. My grounded nature, my simpler desires. In the beginning, I thought that combination would be enough to guide him. But as he grew older, I began to realize something I hadn't fully understood before. The world he was growing into wasn't a world I knew how to navigate. When Dustin was little, everything felt perfect. Briana and I were happy, or at least we had our moments. Our small house was filled with laughter, the kind of laughter that comes from sharing simple, everyday joys. Dinner around the table, Sunday afternoons in the yard, watching him run through the sprinklers. There was a time when we were a family in the truest sense of the word, before the weight of our individual ambitions started to pull us in different directions. But as time went on, I began to notice a change in Dustin, a shift that I didn't quite understand at first. Briana, always the driven woman, always the one who looked ahead, had ensured our son had everything he needed. It started with little things: new clothes, better schools, more expensive toys. And then, when he was just 7, she bought him a computer. Not a toy, mind you, but a real one. One that could connect to the internet and run programs that I had never even heard of. She was determined to set him up for success in a world that was rapidly changing, in a world I wasn't sure I even understood. I remember the day she brought the computer home. I had no idea what to think of it. He needs to understand technology, Briana had said when I expressed some hesitation. He needs to grow up with it. It's the future. But I didn't see the point. I grew up in a world where the future wasn't defined by screens or wires. I spent my childhood fishing with my dad, learning how to build things with my hands. I knew the value of hard work, of patience, of simplicity. And I thought that's what Dustin needed too. So I suggested, maybe a bit too bluntly, that we could teach him to fish. Briana laughed at that, a quick, dismissive laugh that stung more than I let on. Fishing? Jerry, he needs to understand technology. He doesn't need to spend his time with a rod and reel. He needs to prepare for a future that's already here. But Dustin? He thrived in the world Briana had created for him. He took to the computer like a fish to water, learning how to navigate programs, building websites before he was even a teenager. He was a natural, and the world around him was his playground. I watched silently as he grew into someone who could do things with technology that I couldn't even begin to understand. It was like watching him drift away, slipping into a world that didn't have space for me. As he got older, the gap between us grew. Briana's business took off, and so did Dustin's life. He was surrounded by people who spoke the language of success, talking about investments, market trends, business mergers. I tried to keep up, to understand, but it was like trying to catch up with someone running at full speed. He was no longer the boy who would sit on my lap and listen to me tell him stories. Now he was a teenager who rolled his eyes at my simple suggestions. He started to push away from me, and no matter how much I tried to pull him back, it seemed like he was always a step ahead, always a little out of reach. I tried to tell him to slow down, to enjoy life, to appreciate the simple things. But to him, that was weakness. It was old-fashioned. He didn't understand that the life I had known, one built on steady work, simple pleasures, and family bonds, was enough. He didn't see that. To him, success wasn't just about providing for your family. It was about expanding, growing, climbing higher, faster. And all I could do was watch, helpless, as my son grew into a man I didn't fully recognize anymore. At times, I resented the world he was becoming a part of. It felt like it was swallowing him whole, pushing him further and further away from me, from everything I had believed in. Briana and I had always been at odds over what we wanted for Dustin, but I had hoped, at least, that we would find a way to meet in the middle. I hoped our son could find a balance between ambition and simplicity. But in the end, he followed her path, her world of business, of power, of striving, and I stayed in my world, watching from the sidelines. When Dustin was 15, the gap between us became undeniable. He threw a party that felt more like a corporate event than a birthday celebration. Briana had insisted on the extravagance, a fancy caterer, hired entertainment, and a guest list full of business associates. I wanted something simpler, a barbecue in the backyard with his friends from school. But when I brought it up, Briana shut me down quickly. This is how things are done now, Jerry. This is the kind of event that builds connections. These relationships will shape his future. I couldn't argue with that. She was right, of course, but I couldn't help but feel a pang of loss, a sense of something slipping through my fingers. As the party went on, I caught a glimpse of Dustin standing alone by the pool, looking lost in the midst of it all. He was surrounded by strangers, people he was supposed to impress, and for just a moment I saw the little boy I had once known, confused, unsure, vulnerable. "Are you okay, buddy?" I had asked him, walking over. He straightened up quickly, slipping back into the confident persona Briana had encouraged. "Of course, why wouldn't I be?" I smiled, but it didn't feel right. I could tell that the party, the world Briana had created for him, wasn't making him happy. It was making him someone I didn't know. And that hurt more than I let on. When Briana died, I couldn't really understand why I felt compelled to go to the funeral. Was it to say goodbye? Was it to finally face the truth of everything that had been left unresolved between us? Or maybe, just maybe, it was because I needed some kind of closure. Some final moment where I could accept that everything I thought I knew about our life together had somehow been a lie. That there was nothing left for me in the life we had built. Nothing but memories that were quickly fading. The drive to the chapel was long, and the whole way there I could feel the weight of my past pressing down on me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a world that no longer had room for me. The funeral was held in Riverside Memorial Chapel, a beautiful but somber place, filled with polished wood and stained glass windows that seemed to dim the light more than they let it in. As I stepped through the heavy wooden doors, the air felt thick, and there was an undeniable tension hanging in the room. Dustin was at the front, of course. He was the center of attention, just like his mother had been in life. His suit was sharp, the kind of suit you wear when you want to project power and confidence. And his posture was straight, his movements commanding. He was in charge now, whether I liked it or not. And as I looked at him, I couldn't help but feel like a stranger in my own son's life. This wasn't my world anymore. I wasn't part of the circles he moved in, the circles Briana had built for him. I had been out of that world for so long, it was as if I had never belonged in the first place. I found a seat in the back of the chapel, hoping to remain unnoticed. I didn't belong up front with the well-dressed crowd, the people who had been part of Briana's world after me, the ones who spoke about the things I could never fully understand. Deals, acquisitions, power moves. As I sat there, quietly observing, my eyes kept drifting back to Dustin. I couldn't help but notice the way he held himself, his jaw tight, his eyes scanning the room, his face an unreadable mask of frustration. And then, when our eyes met, I saw it. The anger. It wasn't subtle. He wasn't even trying to hide it. His gaze burned with resentment, and I could feel it all the way from across the room. It was like a physical blow, sharp and unyielding. I didn't blame him. I couldn't. I had abandoned him. I had walked away from my family. Or at least, that's how he saw it. That's how I had come to see it too, over the years. In the quiet moments when I would think back to everything I had given up. But the truth was, I had done what I thought was best for me. I had left because I needed to find my own path, my own sense of peace. I had tried to justify it to myself in 1,000 different ways. But now, sitting there in that cold, impersonal chapel, watching my son, I realized just how much it had cost me. It had cost me my family. It had cost me the connection I once had with Dustin. And no matter how much I told myself it had been the right choice, there was no escaping the pain of seeing what I had lost. Dustin's glare was more than just frustration. It was the manifestation of everything I had done wrong. It was the anger of a son who had been left behind, who had been abandoned by the very man who was supposed to protect him. It was the anger of a child who had never fully understood why his father chose to walk away. And now, all those years later, that anger had grown into something deeper, something harder to break. I felt like I was suffocating in that moment. The weight of the judgment in his eyes, the weight of everything that had led us to this point, was almost too much to bear. And yet, as much as I wanted to shrink away, to disappear into the background, something inside me refused to let go. Briana had been a part of my life for so long. She had shaped me in ways I couldn't even begin to understand. And now, even in her death, there was still a connection there, something that pulled me forward despite the pain. The funeral began, and I tried to focus on the words being spoken, but everything felt distant. The eulogies, the prayers, they all seemed like background noise to the storm of emotions brewing inside me. The words about Briana, her successes, her determination, they all felt hollow, as though they were meant for someone else. Because the woman I knew, the woman I once shared a life with, was more than just her business empire. She was more than the image that Dustin had built of her over the years. I kept thinking back to the life we had before. Those years of joy and simplicity, before the tension between us became unbearable, before we drifted so far apart that we couldn't even see each other clearly anymore. Before Briana became a force to be reckoned with, and I became a man just trying to hold on to whatever he had left. And now, here I was, sitting in the back of a chapel, watching my son, the son I had once held in my arms, grow into someone I didn't recognize. When the service ended, I found myself standing at the back of the room, wanting nothing more than to slip away unnoticed. But Dustin's eyes followed me, and as people passed, offering their condolences to him, they pointedly ignored me. I didn't expect anything else, but it still stung. I hadn't been there for him. I hadn't been there for Briana. And now, all I could do was sit back and watch as my son lived a life I had no part in. I had no idea what Briana had left me. It hadn't even crossed my mind that she would leave me anything. Certainly not anything of significance. I imagined maybe it would be something small, just a formality, a token acknowledgement of the role I had once played in her life. But as I sat there in the lawyer's office, listening to the lawyer read the will, my world began to shift. The words came slowly, almost as if the lawyer himself was struggling to believe them. And then it hit me like a wave. Briana had left me everything, $33.5 million, controlling interest in her company, her empire, everything she had built after we parted ways. I couldn't breathe. I felt the air leave my lungs as if I had been punched in the chest. What was happening? I could hardly process it. It didn't make sense. Why would Briana leave all of that to me? I had been out of her life for 15 years. I hadn't been part of her world, her success, or her struggles. She had created something powerful, something far beyond what either of us had ever dreamed when we first started out together. She had done it without me. She had built it all on her own. So why, in the final moments of her life, would she decide to leave it all to me? I looked across the room at Dustin, expecting to see confusion, maybe anger, but what I saw was complete and utter shock. His face had gone ashen, his eyes wide with disbelief. He was staring at me as though I was the one who had caused this storm, the one who had manipulated Briana, the one who had taken everything from him. But that wasn't the case. I hadn't done anything. I hadn't been part of her world for so long. I hadn't earned a thing. The money, the company, the legacy that she had worked so hard for, none of it was mine to take. And yet, here I was, sitting across from a man who had been groomed to inherit all of it, only to see the pieces of his future fall apart in an instant. Dustin opened his mouth, then closed it. He stood up as if he didn't know whether to leave or stay, his movements frantic. His breath was shallow, his hands trembling. I could see the muscles in his jaw clenching, his body rigid with tension. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but the words still cut through the room. "This has to be a mistake." His hands balled into fists at his sides, the nails digging into his palms. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't explain it. I couldn't tell him why Briana had done this. I had no answers. None of this made sense to me either. Why would she choose me, the man who had failed her, who had walked away when things got tough, over the son she had raised, the son she had built her empire for? The lawyer, Dan Morrison, didn't flinch. He was calm, steady, like he had seen this kind of thing before. His voice was neutral, almost too neutral, as he went on with the reading. "Mrs. Flores was very specific about her wishes," he continued, lifting the next page of the will. "Mr. Flores, you are not only the beneficiary of her personal estate, but you are also to receive controlling interest in Flores Consulting Solutions, including all subsidiary companies, real estate holdings, and business assets." The words blurred together as I tried to process them. It was too much to understand, too much to accept. How had Briana gone from the woman I knew, the one who couldn't wait to break free from everything I represented, to this? Why would she leave me in charge of everything she had built, everything that had come to define her? I wasn't the man she had wanted me to be. I wasn't the one who stood by her side while she built this empire. I had failed her in the most fundamental way. And yet, here I was, sitting in a lawyer's office, with all of it in front of me. Dustin was shaking his head now, trying to come to grips with the words he had just heard. "This isn't fair," he muttered. His voice cracked. "She promised me. She promised me all of this. She said I was the one who would carry on her legacy." I could see the hurt in his eyes, the confusion, the sense of betrayal. It wasn't just about the money, the company, the inheritance. It was about his place in the world, his place in Briana's world. And that place had just been taken from him, ripped away in a way that he couldn't understand. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't meet his eyes because I knew what he was thinking. He blamed me. I wasn't just a man who had been left out of her life. To Dustin, I was the man who had taken everything from him. And maybe, in some ways, he was right. But I hadn't asked for this. I hadn't wanted any of this. I didn't know why Briana had left it to me, but I couldn't change it. And now, sitting there, in that sterile office, the weight of it was suffocating. It wasn't just about the money or the company. It was about everything that had led us to this point. The years of silence, the mistakes, the choices we had made, the ones that had taken us down separate paths. And now, the consequences were here, crashing down on us in ways I couldn't have foreseen. The lawyer looked at me as if waiting for me to respond, but I couldn't. There was nothing to say. My mind was still reeling. Briana, the woman who had once been my partner, had chosen to leave me everything she had fought for, everything she had built without me. And all I could do was sit there, stunned, trying to grasp the magnitude of it all. Dustin, however, wasn't done. "This is some kind of joke," he snapped, his voice shaking with anger. "She wouldn't have left you all this. She couldn't have." I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to explain that I hadn't manipulated Briana, that I hadn't played some part in her final decisions. But the words wouldn't come. What could I say? The reality was too much to bear, too painful to put into words. And then the lawyer spoke again, calmly, as if delivering a final blow. Mr. Flores, I assure you there is no mistake. These were her wishes, and they were carried out with the full legal authority of her will. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand answers. I wanted to understand why she had done this. But there were no answers, no explanations that could make sense of this. And Dustin? He was lost, and I was just as lost as he was. As the lawyer continued reading, the words blurred in my mind. Everything felt surreal. I was still trying to make sense of it all, struggling to reconcile the reality in front of me with the world I thought I knew. But Dustin, my son, was becoming more and more agitated by the second. I could see the way his face reddened, the clenched fist at his sides, the tension in every muscle of his body. He couldn't understand it. He didn't want to. To him, this was a betrayal. To him, this was an injustice. He was convinced that I had somehow manipulated Briana, that I had somehow tricked her into leaving me everything, her money, her company, the life she had built. His words were laced with disbelief and anger, accusations flying from his mouth before he even stopped to think. You must have done something, Dustin spat, his voice cracking with emotion. You tricked her, didn't you? You convinced her when she was sick, when she wasn't thinking straight. There's no way she would have left you all of this. She wouldn't have. His words were like daggers, each one stabbing at me, each one digging deeper into the wound that had already been open. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to scream that I hadn't done anything, that I hadn't spoken to Briana in years, that this was her choice, her decision, not mine. But the truth was, the more he yelled, the more I realized how futile it was. There was no convincing him, no way to make him understand. And in some twisted way, that made it easier for me to sit back and let him say whatever he wanted. I had no answers for him. I had no way of explaining why Briana had left everything to me. I had no idea why she had made that decision. But the one thing I did know, the one thing I had come to understand in that room, was that Briana had made her decision, and there was nothing I could do to change it. I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me as Dustin's rage built. It wasn't peace, not exactly, but more like an acceptance. Briana had chosen this. She had chosen me. And there was nothing in the world that could undo it. The anger in Dustin's eyes, the accusations, the disbelief, they were all out of my control. I didn't want to be the one who had caused this pain. I didn't want to be the reason for Dustin's fury. But somewhere deep inside, I knew that this wasn't just about me. It wasn't just about the money or the company or the inheritance. It was about something deeper, something that had been brewing for years. The distance between Dustin and me, the years of silence, the misunderstandings, it was all coming to a head. And no amount of words or explanations would fix it. This wasn't about Briana's decision alone. It was about everything that had led us to this moment, everything that had built up over time. The fractures in our family, the way things had unraveled between me and Dustin. The truth was, I had been a father in body, but not in spirit. I had been there physically, but I hadn't truly been present in his life. And now, standing in that sterile office, watching Dustin's anger spill over, I realized how much I had failed him. Brianna's choice to leave me everything was more than just a financial gesture. It was an emotional one, too. It was her way of acknowledging the love we had once shared, the bond that had existed between us before it was torn apart by ambition, by misunderstandings, and by time. But Dustin didn't see that. He couldn't see that. All he saw was the father who had left him behind, who had abandoned their family in pursuit of his own peace. Dustin's voice grew louder, more frantic. She never would have done this if you hadn't manipulated her. You're just a coward who couldn't handle being married to someone better than you. She didn't deserve to be with you. The words stung, and I could feel the truth in them. I wasn't the man Briana had needed. I had failed her. And more than that, I had failed Dustin. I had been so consumed with my own struggle, my own desires, that I hadn't seen what was happening to him. I hadn't seen the ways he had needed me to be a father, needed me to be present in his life. Instead, I had retreated into my own world, one where I could pretend to be content without the weight of responsibility. As Dustin's rage turned into frustration, I could see his carefully constructed world beginning to fall apart. This was more than just an inheritance. This was about identity, about control, about legacy. Briana had built an empire, and Dustin had been groomed to inherit it. But now, here I was, standing in the middle of it all, the man who had been left out of everything, the man who was suddenly at the center of it all. I realized, as I sat there in that room, that this confrontation wasn't about me versus Dustin. It was about both of us coming to terms with the years of mistakes and misunderstandings. We were both angry, both hurt, both trying to figure out what role we had in Briana's life and in each other's lives. I wanted to speak, to tell Dustin that this wasn't my fault, that I hadn't manipulated Briana, that I hadn't wanted any of this. But the truth was, I couldn't undo the past, and as much as I wanted to explain, to make him see that Briana's decision wasn't about betrayal, it was about forgiveness. About her forgiving me, even if she hadn't said it in so many words, I knew that Dustin wasn't ready to hear it. He wasn't ready to accept the truth. So I let him yell. I let him release all the anger that had built up over the years. And as he did, I couldn't help but feel a strange sense of peace. It wasn't relief, exactly. It wasn't closure. But it was a recognition that this moment, this fight, this confrontation was something that had to happen. It was something we both needed to go through, whether we liked it or not. I couldn't change what had happened between us, but I could choose how I responded. And right now, all I could do was sit in that chair and let Dustin have his say, knowing that this was the beginning of something neither of us had expected, but something that was, perhaps, long overdue. As the lawyer finished reading the will, I sat there, numb. The words still felt like they were echoing in my head, too big for me to fully comprehend. Briana had left me more than just money. She had left me everything she had built, everything she had worked so hard for. But as I sat there, I realized it wasn't the wealth or the assets that held the most weight. It was something deeper. She had given me a chance to start over, a chance to prove to myself that I was worth something. For so long, I had felt like I wasn't enough. I had always lived in the shadow of Briana's success, of Dustin's brilliance, and I had internalized those feelings of inadequacy. I had allowed them to define me, to shape the way I saw myself in the world around me. But now, in the wake of this unexpected inheritance, I saw something different. For the first time in a long time, I realized that I had a chance to build my own future, on my terms. Dustin may never understand. And maybe, just maybe, that was something I would have to live with. I had hurt him, failed him, and there was no easy way to undo that. The distance between us was vast, and while I hoped one day he would understand, I knew that wasn't something I could control. What mattered now was what I did with this opportunity Briana had given me. I had a chance to rebuild, to become the man I had always wanted to be, but never had the courage to strive for. I had spent years thinking I was too small, too simple, too ordinary for the world Briana inhabited. But now I had been handed the keys to that world. And for once, I wasn't just a passenger in my own life. I had a chance to drive, to chart my own course, to prove to myself that I could be more than the man I had been. I walked out of the lawyer's office feeling something I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't joy, not exactly. It was something quieter, more profound. It was the feeling of possibility. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could take control of my future. The weight of my past mistakes, my failures, my regrets, had always seemed so heavy, but now they felt lighter. It wasn't that I could forget them, but they no longer had the power to define me. Briana had given me that gift. She had left me a chance to reinvent myself, to become the man I had always known I could be. And for the first time, I didn't want to waste it. I wasn't going to squander this opportunity. I wasn't going to let this inheritance define me, but I was going to use it to shape the life I had always dreamed of. As I stepped out into the sunlight, the weight in my chest felt different. It wasn't the crushing pressure I had carried for so long. It was a weight of responsibility, yes, but it was also a weight of potential. Briana's final act had been one of forgiveness, one of letting go of the past, and I knew I had to do the same. The past was gone, and now I had a chance to build something new. The real challenge, I realized, wasn't the money or the company. The real challenge was finding who I was outside of the shadow of my past. It was about building a life that wasn't defined by what I had lost, but by what I was willing to gain. It was about stepping into the future, unburdened by the mistakes of my past. I took a deep breath, the air feeling fresher, cleaner than it had in years. And for the first time in a long time, I felt ready. I was ready to face the challenges ahead, to prove to myself and to Briana that I could do something with this second chance. As I walked away from the lawyer's office, I didn't know exactly what the future held. But I knew one thing for certain. This was just the beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would take me.